helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, Canadian certified counselor and award-winning psychotherapist.
Welcome to the Life Transformation Show. As we celebrate the Christmas season, we're exploring one of the most familiar parts of the Christmas story, but from a perspective you might not have considered before. Have you ever wondered why King Herod responded so violently to the news of Jesus' birth? What could drive someone to such extreme actions? And how might Herod's behavior mirror some of the struggles people face today with mental health, specifically paranoia? This Christmas, we're exploring the biblical narrative of Matthew 2, 1-19 in a new and intriguing way by using King Herod's story to shed light on a pressing mental health issue, paranoia. Whether you're someone who's experienced these struggles, you know someone who has, or you're simply curious about how this ancient story connects to modern mental health, today's show has something for you. But before we begin, let me remind you that the Life Transformation Show is brought to you by Elim Counseling Services. If you're looking for counseling or resources this holiday season, visit us at elimcounselingministry.com. And you can also find resources in Michael's book, The Transformed Life, which is now on Amazon. Now, let's welcome our Canadian certified counselor and award-winning psychotherapist and author, Michael Hart. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Denise. And thank you to our listeners as well for joining us today. This discussion today is incredibly relevant because paranoia, as described in the DSM-4 and as found in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1-19, continues to affect many lives today. The Bible recounts Herod's extreme reaction to the news of the Christ child's birth, which reflects the destructive impact of unchecked paranoia. Statistics show that approximately 4.4% of Americans, around 9.2 million people, experience paranoid personality disorder. And in Canada, it affects 5.6% of the population. This is one of the most common personality disorder, yet it often goes undiagnosed and untreated. I just want to be clear here as we go through this show today that this show isn't intended to diagnose anyone, but to offer insights and encouragement. So if you or someone you love is struggling with symptoms of paranoia, reaching out to a mental health professional is a vital first step. Paranoia can escalate over time, but with proper support, healing is possible.
So, Michael, as lay people, we use the word paranoid to describe people who are fearful. But what exactly is paranoia from a mental health perspective?
That's a great question, Denise. According to the DSM-5, paranoia is associated with a mental health condition, paranoid personality disorder, which is characterized by a pervasive distrust and suspicion of others. But to meet this diagnostic criteria, an individual must display at least 4 of the following 7 symptoms. 1, suspicion without sufficient basis, believing others are exploiting, harming, or deceiving them without evidence. 2, preoccupation with unjustified doubts about loyalty or trustworthiness, constantly doubting the motives of friends or associates. 3, reluctance to confide in others, fear that information shared will be used maliciously against them. And 4, interpreting benign remarks or events as threatening, misreading harmless situations as personal attacks or plots. And 5, persistently bearing grudges, being unforgiving or perceived insults or slights that are not really there. And 6, perceiving attacks on one's character that are not apparent to others, reacting angrily or counter-attacking others for over perceived criticism. And the 7th is unjustified suspicion regarding fidelity of a partner, believing without evidence that a spouse or partner is unfaithful. So these symptoms, they have to have at least 4 of these 7 symptoms, and these symptoms often lead to significant disruption in relationships, work, and daily life. Understanding these signs is essential because untreated paranoia can worsen over time, creating significant challenges for the individuals and those around them. And so it's important for us to understand what we mean when we say someone is paranoid, understand what is happening and that they're having these 4 of these 7 characteristics.
Yes, Michael. So let's talk about the first sign of paranoia that you see in the biblical story.
The first sign of paranoia we see in King Herod's life is his tendency to feel threatened without objective evidence. Let's examine the biblical historical context. Herod was born in 72 BC and became king in 37 BC at the age of 36. By the time Christ was born, according to Matthew Henry's commentary, Herod was 71 years old at the time and had been reigning for some 35 years. So to be that advanced in age and still obsess over a newborn child as a threat to his throne is clearly irrational. Realistically, it would have taken decades for the Christ child to even begin to pose a political challenge to Herod. So if we use a modern day example, this would be like Donald Trump or Joe Biden fearing someone who might run for office 30 years from now. Herod had no objective reason to feel threatened by Jesus. Yet he responded with extreme measures, including the massacre of the innocent children in Bethlehem, according to the biblical records. Historian Josephus sheds further light on Herod's paranoid personality disorder, or his paranoia. He recorded that Herod placed spies throughout the city and roads to monitor what people were saying about him. So you know that's some serious sign of paranoia. He wanted to know what others were saying about him. Herod even disguised himself as a common citizen and mingled with the crowds at night to gather opinions about his rule. Imagine being so consumed with fear and mistrust that you as a king would leave the safety of your palace to eavesdrop on conversation. This behavior fits perfectly with the DSM-5 criterion of interpreting neutral or benign actions as threatening. We see similar manifestation of paranoia today. For example, someone might believe their co-workers are plotting against them or that their food is being poisoned, even when there is no evidence to support these fears. In relationships, paranoia might look like a spouse suspecting infidelity without any objective proof. Herod's actions demonstrate how paranoia left unchecked can lead to destructive decisions and deteriorating and affecting relationships negatively. It isolates individuals and fuels a cycle of fear and control.
So, Michael, that really put things into perspective. Herod's lack of trust and insecurity certainly fueled his destructive behaviors. What's the second sign of paranoia that Herod displayed And how does this relate to what we see today?
That's a great question, Denise. The second sign of paranoia we see in King Herod's story is his persistent mistrust and doubt about the loyalty of others. This mistrust became evident in Matthew 2:7, where it says, "Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared." That word secretly is key to what I'm saying here. Herod's decision to call the wise men in secret highlights his paranoia. He didn't trust the people around him, even in his own palace, not his advisors, his soldiers, or anyone in the court for that matter. Instead of openly sharing his intentions, he concocted a secret plan to use the wise men to locate the Christ child. So Herod's lack of trust backfired in a major way. Had he trusted his own soldiers or court officials, he could have sent them with the wise men under the pretense of protection, ensuring they returned with accurate information. Instead, he chose to rely solely on the wise men, strangers who had no allegiance to him, and he lost control of the situation when they were warned in a dream and didn't return to him. This mistrust of others is a hallmark of paranoia as described in the DSM-5. People with paranoia has these tendencies are to be suspicious of those closest to them, people that they should trust, doubting their loyalty or intentions, even when there is no evidence to justify their fears. For Herod, this deep-seated mistrust contributed to his downfall.
That's fascinating, Michael, and also tragic to see how Herod's lack of trust led to self-sabotage. It sounds like paranoia often causes people to create the very problems they're trying to avoid. How do we see this kind of mistrust playing out in modern relationships or even in workplaces?
That's a great question, Denise. Paranoia often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In modern relationships, someone with paranoid tendencies might constantly accuse their spouse of infidelity, even when there is no evidence. Over time, this constant mistrust can erode the relationship, pushing the other person away. Exactly what the paranoid individual fears. So this is how it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In workplaces, paranoia might manifest as an employee who believes their colleagues are conspiring against them, hiding information or sabotaging their efforts. So this could lead this employee to have conflict with their employers, and this could lead to a job loss situation. So the very thing that they fear came upon them. Herod's story serves as a cautionary tale for all of us. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. When we trust God, we can relinquish some of the fears that we have and the insecurities that fuel mistrust and paranoia. Trusting others within reason is also essential for healthy relationships and for effective leadership. King Herod did not have that effective leadership.
So, Michael, let's move on to the third sign of Herod's paranoia. You mentioned that Herod interpreted benign remarks or incidents as threatening. Can you explain what that looked like in his story and how it relates to paranoia today?
That's a good question, Denise. The third sign of paranoia in Herod's story is his tendency to interpret benign remarks as threats. So these are non-threatening incidents. So let's look at the phrase that, for example, in Matthew 2, verse 2, where the wise men asked him, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? This phase triggered Herod's paranoia. But when we examine the context in which this question is being asked, there was no objective reason for him to feel threatened. At the time, there was no established royal dynasty in Israel from which a child could have been born to challenge Herod's rule. Herod himself was the king. And by all logical accounts, the next ruler would be a descendant of Herod. After his death, history tells us that 3 of his sons were appointed to rule in his place. The wise men's reference to the king of the Jews was a mystical spiritual title pointing to the Messiah, not a political rival. Yet Herod took this benign statement to mean that someone was about to overthrow him. A baby that was just born was about to overthrow him. This is a classic symptom of paranoia as described in the DSM-5, which says interpreting neutral or benign comments as hostile or threatening. That is, we see the same pattern today in people with paranoia. They have the same tendencies. They might overhear a coworker saying something entirely unrelated to them and assume that it's some kind of a threat or some kind of a veiled criticism. Or they might hear laughter in the next room and think that people are mocking them without any evidence at all. In relationships, a paranoid spouse might hear their partner make a casual remark and interpret it as a sign of betrayal or deceit. Maybe you're going through that right now with someone in your relationship where they're suspecting you for no reason at all. That's paranoia. Herod's reaction to the phrase King of the Jews led to catastrophic consequences. His fear and misinterpretation of the phrase King of the Jews caused him to order the massacre of innocent children, as we find recorded later in Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. This shows how paranoia can escalate and lead to devastating actions when it's not treated, when it's left unchecked.
So, Michael, it's tragic how something as simple as a phrase could set Herod on such a destructive path. Why do you think people with paranoia are so prone to misinterpreting neutral comments? And how can they start to break free from that pattern?
That's a great question, and let's jump right into that. So when people with paranoia, they are often hypersensitive to perceived threat because of underlying insecurities or past experiences. They live in a heightened state of vigilance because of these past experiences, always scanning for danger. Maybe they had some betrayal in their childhood or in a past relationship. So now they're seeing danger everywhere, even when none exists. So this pattern often stems from unresolved trauma or relational wounds from a past relationship.
Michael will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist and author Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services has been speaking on the topic, King Herod, the first Grinch and his struggle with paranoia. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677. or 1-877-204-2914. Please consider making a donation to this Christ-centered ministry by sending it to elimmentalhealthfoundation.com, which is now a registered charity. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. Back to Michael.
So, for example, someone who experienced betrayal or rejection in the past may become overly sensitive, seeing threats where there are no threats. It's like they're wearing a pair of glasses that distorts everything that they see, making neutral or kind remarks seem harmful or hostile. So breaking free from this pattern requires a combination of psychological and spiritual intervention. From a psychological standpoint, cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT as it's known, can help individuals recognize and challenge distorted thought patterns. Spiritually, they can turn to scriptures to find reassurance and to have a godly perspective of events. Isaiah 41:10 reminds us, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." So turning to God's sovereignty can help individuals release the need to control or overanalyze others people's words or actions. It allows them to rest in the truth that God is their protector and their defender.
It's heartbreaking, Michael, to see how paranoia can lead people to interpret benign events or comments as threatening, especially when these fears have no basis in reality. You've shared some powerful examples that show how this mindset can strain relationships and create unnecessary conflict. Let's move on now to the fourth and final sign of Herod's paranoia. What is it, Michael?
The fourth sign of his paranoia is that we see Herod's life in that he has this tendency to retaliate without evidence. This is perhaps the most destructive aspect of paranoia because it often results in harm to others as well as to the individual who is doing the retaliation. So we read about the killing of the innocents in the biblical narrative. So because when the wise men did not return to him, he became angry and he retaliated. He realized that he had been outwitted by the wise men, and he became furious and gave orders to kill all the young boys within Bethlehem and its vicinity, who were 2 years old and under. So this horrific act of violence was entirely unnecessary. Herod had no evidence that this child posed any threat to his throne, yet he retaliated with extreme measures. His paranoia blinded him to reason and compassion, driving him to commit an atrocity. We see similar patterns in modern-day examples of paranoia. For instance, someone in the workplace might retaliate against a colleague they falsely believe is plotting against them by spreading rumors or sabotaging their work. In relationships, paranoia can lead to emotional or even physical retaliation, as seen in the story of the suspicious husband that we talked about earlier. Paranoia can also take spiritual forms, and this is one of the most dangerous way that people can retaliate. People might retaliate against perceived offenses by cutting off relationships, leaving churches, or confronting others in an accusatory manner, all based on imaginary situations. They may even spiritualize their actions, believing that they're acting under divine guidance, when in reality, they are driven by fear and insecurity.
So, Michael, that's so sobering at the destructive power of paranoia. Herod's actions didn't just harm others. They ultimately destroyed his legacy and caused immense suffering. What advice would you give to someone listening who may be in a relationship with someone struggling with paranoia? Or how can they cope and navigate such a challenging dynamic?
Excellent question. It's crucial to approach the situation with both understanding and firm boundaries. If you're in a relationship with someone who exhibits paranoia, whether mild or severe, the first step is to react calmly but firmly to their suspicion. For instance, if they accuse you of something unfounded, avoid lengthy debate or emotional argument trying to reason with them or prove your innocence. It often doesn't work because paranoia is not rooted in facts. It's a distorted thought patterns. Instead, calmly acknowledge their concerns while setting clear boundaries. You might say, for example, I understand that you are worried, but I can assure you that there is no truth to that. Secondly, do not facilitate the mental illness. By this, I mean, don't enable their paranoia by participating in behaviors that reinforce their suspicion. For example, if your partner constantly asks to check your phone or monitor your social media, resist giving in to these demands. It may feel like the easier option in the moment, but it only reinforces their fears and feeds their cycle of distrust. Thirdly, seek professional help. Paranoid personality disorder is a mental health condition that requires counseling and in some cases medication. A trained therapist can help both the individual and the couple learn strategies to manage paranoia and rebuild trust. Proverbs 15:22 tells us, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. Seeking guidance isn't a sign of weakness. It's a step towards healing. Lastly, protect your own mental health. Being in a relationship with someone struggling with paranoia can be emotionally draining. Make sure you have a support system that can help you to go through this very trying situation.
So, Michael, we're quickly out of time. So thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of the Life Transformation Show. So we want to remind you that this program is a listener-funded program. So if you have found it helpful and would like to support our ministry, please consider making a donation to elimmentalhealthfoundation.com. You can find about 200 podcasts available on YouTube that covers a variety of topics to help you in your journey. So don't forget, we're on the air every Monday morning at 9:30. Until next time, this is your co-host, Denise Hart.
And Michael Hart, praying together that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.